Welcome to Block Party. I'm your host, Mike Wahle. Thank you for watching. If you're enjoying, hit the subscribe button, rate and review us on our Process to Perform channel on YouTube. You can hit me up at Mike Wahle68 on Twitter or TikTok, Process to Perform on Instagram. Guys, I know the NFL draft just started, was just finished up, and certainly we could go and talk about some more guys. I have something I think is kind of interesting. I'm lucky enough every week to meet with some people that are coaches, administrators, higher ups in the National Football League. I get to be part of this group discussion. And last week we were talking about the hip drop tackle, but really kind of a broader discussion about, at least with me, about tackling and about kind of the state of how we allow or how we promote kind of best practice technique in the National Football League, and how that trickles down to college, how that trickles down to high school and beyond. But really just the concept of how far a player can come if they learn how to do things the right way. So I put together a little presentation for this group. I just wanted to share it with everybody because for me, it's just kind of interesting information to think about if you're an agent, if you're a coach, if you're a parent, and certainly if you're a player. When you look at the National Football League, 80%-ish of the tackles that are missed because of what happens before a player tries to go into contact. I'll say that again. Of all the misses in tackling that happen during competition, 80% of those misses happen pre-contact. When you look at all tackles, make or miss, in the National Football League, I did a 2-year study. This is a couple years ago, so the numbers might have changed a little bit. I doubt they've changed much because practices have only gotten worse. 70% of tackles, you see good shoulder contact. You see proper arm wrap, kind of head to the side, pop your hips, run your feet, etc. 30% of the time, we go into contact by launching, poor shoulder contact, try to arm tackle, poor tracking. 30% for any one of those three. So in other words, if you can improve your process and you can go from 70% efficient to 80, 85, 90% efficient just in your process, the outcome is going to be parabolically better than some of these other guys. And as we've discussed on this show many times, my son pointed out to me, if you're 30% better than the next guy, you're going to get paid 3 times as much. You're certainly going to be in the league longer. So let's talk about how we can, let's put together a language structure to talk about tackling today so we can kind of get into this a little bit more. Everyone's got a system. I have a methodology. It's hunt and hammer. Hunt, pre-contact, consisting of squaring and dipping. And then hammer, post-contact, or contact, post-contact, hammer shoulder, and exploding, right? Pull the pin, feet chase hips, the whole thing. Pre-contact, though, we're talking about square and dip. Can you decelerate into control with your feet kind of in a foam booth so you can now accelerate into the contact? Can you dip? Can you load your hips? Can you maintain a good posterior chain and hip loaded posture so that you can A, lower your level under a stiff arm, and B, be able to keep that posterior chain intact, loaded, so you can deliver maximum force at a 90-degree angle into the ball carrier. And what we see more often than not is that when tackles are missed, they're missed because we have poor footwork. So you see, like here, Jamal Adams a couple of years ago, when you cross over, when you get your shoulders pointed to the sideline, when you're unable to maintain a square position, your feet get too wide, so therefore you have to cross over on your next move because you don't work on deceleration, you don't track properly, you really don't spend time doing this in practice like you should, you have a lot of these issues. A couple of years ago, here's another tape from years ago in Miami, Bobby McCain here. Bobby is not decelerating how he should, trying to tackle Mark Ingram back in the day. And so as we slow this down, he should be able to step right there in that position. If I freeze frame it, he should be able to step and make contact, right shoulder to the right hip of Mark Ingram, and step through that and run through the play. But because he doesn't associate kind of the strength conditioning, this is how we decelerate under control, and so we can reaccelerate and change direction. We don't associate with our tackling because we don't spend time doing that as a coaching staff. He steps underneath himself here. And now he is unable to decel into acceleration. He steps underneath himself, and now he has to arm tackle so we don't make that shoulder contact that we're looking for. And a good runner just runs right through it. This happens all the time. This happens every game, probably, I don't know, 6 to 8 times a game. And so my baseline rule is very simple. You've seen a ton of athletes get in front of somebody. Maybe they get run over. Maybe they give up more yards than you want to give up. But the players both, A, get up and can play the next play, and the tackler makes the tackle. So the baseline rule is just put yourself, from a footwork and body position standpoint, put yourself in a position to win. We see here from the Kansas City Chiefs playing against the Niners. Guy breaks through the hole. And listen, we're not going to sit here and say he's stepping near foot, near shoulder. He's got perfect body position. But 22 is in a great footwork and body position to make contact with this runner, even though the runner's lowered his shoulder. Could we do better? Can we do a better job at a number of different kind of details of the sport? Absolutely. But if we're thinking big picture, breaking down what's actually important about tackling, this person is making a 90-degree impact. His body, his footwork, everything is underneath himself. He can pop his hips into contact and run his feet. He might not deliver the blow here because the running back's running hard. He lowered his shoulder. So as we watch this play out, the running back's going to get a couple more yards here. Makes a good play. But they both get up. They live to fight another day. Contact is made. The play is made. And this is all because he puts himself in good body position. He obviously uses his arm to wrap up. He doesn't let the guy go. And recently, we have seen the hip drop tackle, and really it's because of this play right here. But Jerry Jones and Stephen Jones complained about this at the end of the season. They wanted to investigate it. Now, nothing came of it, but I'm sure something will down the line. But it's because Tony Pollard gets hurt on a play where he catches the ball in like a Texas route, turns to go upfield, and he is caught from the side, and the defender swings his hips by literally picking his feet off the ground, swings his hip from one side to the other. And now we're talking about a new style of tackle, really. And if you watch this play, he breaks his leg here. And if you watch this play, now if I just freeze the play here, you stop your feet. Yeah, of course you want to run through the tackle, but if you stop your feet and just drag, now the forces going into the ground are exactly where the contact came from. It's going to pull him down. Tony's probably going to be able to drag this player for another yard or two. He's a 190, 200-pound guy, and then he's going to fall over. What happens when you pick your feet up and swing your legs through? Now there's a centrifugal force that takes place that is actually magnifying the force into the body or the hips right now of Tony Pollard. And then to top it off, of course, he's putting his body on the back of Tony's legs. There's too much pressure, too much force, too much accelerative force. And something's got to give. Unfortunately, in this case, it was the running back's legs. If we look at this from just a physics and math standpoint, centrifugal force, and you picture this, you see the man in the middle of the circle. He's on a string. He's got, let's say, a rock. He's spinning it around, and you're trying to figure out what that force is at the edge of the rock. That's your centrifugal force pointing out away from the middle. Now, let's just put this in. Your arms are wrapped around the hips in this situation of the running back. As you swing your lower body by kicking your feet out from one side to the other, this is what you're creating. You're creating this equation, which you look at is force equals mass times angular velocity squared over the radius, which in this case would be the distance between the shoulder pad contact with the hip and then the hip of the defender. So the angular velocity is a squared factor, centrifugal force you can generate. And so to put this in context, for a 200-pound guy who's got maybe 100 pounds, at or below the waist, If he swings it and he's running at 15 miles an hour and he just jumps, grabs onto the midsection, let's say it's 1.5 feet, and swings his angle around, roughly speaking, you're going to go from, a 200-pound body, if he just jumped on his back, 200 pounds of force put on, on the direct center of gravity of the running back. All of a sudden now, by swinging through, you are generating over 1,000 pounds of force going the opposite direction, and it's almost instantaneous. Okay. And that's why the pressure is so great. And that's why guys like Tony Pollard got hurt in this play. And this is why this is could be in the future a point of emphasis. The problem is it is extremely effective because of that equation right there. You see it here. You let your knees go, you let your legs go, and all of a sudden, as those hips run through, man, you are just putting a ton of pressure. And when I saw the play for the first time, I thought of the rodeo. You see these guys are steer trappers here. What are they doing? Now they're doing it with their feet in front, so the steer goes straight down. But you watch these guys, they're doing the same thing, man. They're taking all of their weight and they're swinging down off of their mount, bringing the hips around, and all of a sudden you get just thousands of pounds of force into essentially here the neck of the steer. And so what's really the only difference is they're pushing it forward instead of getting behind the legs, in which case the body goes into the legs. So you have all this force kind of behind your center of gravity and you have weight going on your legs. So it really just comes into a physics thing. And I know for some of you, you're going to be like, Mike, this doesn't matter. But for me, it's super interesting because it's a super effective way to make tackles. But if you put your head behind and you put your body behind the runner, it all of a sudden becomes extremely dangerous because it's a force magnifier or a factorial square of the angular velocity you create, and that depends largely on how fast you're moving. I think I got one more here to give a shout out to Appleton, Minnesota, which is a place I wasn't aware of, but I do love Appleton, Wisconsin, very close to the home of the Green Bay Packers. Great job by this fella here. But again, the same thing. They're putting all that weight down on the neck, down on the front legs of that steer to slow him down, to stop momentum. And this is what you see this is the same kind of thought process that's being used right now by smaller DBs in order to make plays against bigger running backs. And it makes sense because it's so effective. We see the physics behind it. You look at the sport of rugby, there's been this has been an issue in rugby over the last couple seasons. And they're really trying to get rid of the idea that if you take your feet off the ground and you swing your hips from one side to the other. Now, this player is held up right now, and this is part of the problem with regulating these plays is that 16's holding this runner up. He's turned to the side, so a lot of bad things can happen here regardless. But when the tackler, for coming from the right to left on your screen, when the tackler picks his feet up and swings his hips over, all of a sudden you get all that extra force and your legs come down. Bad things happen. You see this player gets hurt. This guy goes to the sin bin. It's a point of contention. We see this one here, and this is maybe the most relevant one as it pertains to football because you've got a larger back who's dragging the would-be tackler. And finally the tackler goes, I got to get all my weight off of the ground. You see me drag. Finally picks his feet up here, goes down because at some point the running back's not going to be able to continue, especially if you put all the weight down on his hips. The problem is, as we can imagine, in this situation, the whole centrifugal force is gone. You've been dragging the person, your feet have been on the ground, you haven't swung from left to right, you haven't swung in any kind of arc or radius. You're just putting weight now and changing his center of gravity. It still can be dangerous, but it's as legal as you can get. It's as clean as you can get as well. The only problem here is, you look at it from the perspective of DB. Nobody wants to get dragged like that, like a little kid for 5 yards. Okay. Now, this person was given a penalty because his feet kicked up. A lot of people have a problem with how this played out. But if you watch the play one more time, you'll just see that you try to tackle him, 1, 2, around the hips, 2, 3, 4, 5, head behind, and finally gets his feet up to get all the weight on there. And it's almost like a, man, what am I supposed to do moment. You imagine like Derrick Henry carrying a guy. You got to get your feet up off the ground, keep it all the weight onto his back, try to slow him down, try to make a tackle. You look at something similar here. This was not a play that was called, but you look at this play, it's the same idea. You're trying to make a tackle, and your lower body swings behind again because it's head behind. I want to reinforce that. Head behind tackling is one of the reasons this is happening so often. Your hips, your momentum swings behind this player from right to left, left to right, depending on how you're looking at it. And all of a sudden, you get this increased force down into the ground. Behind you, get rolled up. Minka comes over and finishes up. Legal tackle, just there's an opportunity for injury there, something they have to consider. This is another scenario where this makes this hard to legislate. You see in this scenario, the runner is actually, you picture a running back trying to dive or get forward for that extra 2 yards, not trying to run through this tackle. The tackler is too high and he tries to kind of rodeo him down here by any means necessary. Player ends up slipping, gets hit in a very awkward position. You see he's almost doing the splits here and gets hurt. Not a bad tackle, but again, when you're kind of looking at now that you understand the physics behind some of these things and what the forces are, you can see why the NFL needs to be judicious about how they go about making sure that we're trying to use best practice when we tackle. A little limp off, love it. One more time. I'll let this one run through. Now you look at a guy. Okay. So what are we saying? We're saying that we don't practice tackling enough. We're generally not as good at it as we used to just because we don't spend time on it. I think everybody can see that. And now what's happening, and I'll just point it out now. I was going to point it out in a couple of minutes, but we've introduced rugby tackling into the National Football League. And rugby tackling, because they don't wear helmets, was taught, hey, we're going to go head behind. We're going to go head behind because in rugby, if you go head in front, you get the body falls on you, it falls on your exposed head. Well, we wear helmets. So this isn't necessarily the right way to do business. What happens with superior athletes when you go head behind and you get stepped is you oftentimes, especially if you're not just a committed tackler, instead of running through, you get oftentimes find yourself trying to dive and grab around the waist, not around the thigh, but dive and grab around the waist and not get the man down by any means necessary, especially when it's a defensive back versus a larger running back. That is the crux of what's happening. This is this play, this hip drop, this swinging, all of these plays that you see that are going head behind, the feet are coming up and the legs are swinging around. These are a consequence of teaching rugby tackling, but only teaching it kind of halfway because we don't demand perfection from our athletes. Now, when I talk about perfection, it's not just about the tackle, like we said before, it's how you get into confrontation. Now, guys like Bobby Wagner are so good at taking on blocks, they can take on a center or a guard, shock him, and then still keep his body square to the line of scrimmage, square to the runner. And even though Bobby's high here because he's such a superior physical athlete compared to this running back, he can just kind of envelop him, grab, and take him down. But it's not just the tackle. It's how you go into contact. It's how your block protection is. It's do you have the right footwork and hand placement in that moment so that you can get off and accelerate through contact if you need to. A lot of guys can't do that. We watch Patrick Queen here. Patrick Queen does a great job of rolling into contact here and preventing an issue against, kind of similar like for like athletes here. Najee Harris versus Patrick Queen. Queen's chasing him, goes high, is running, and says there's a lot of things he can do. He could try to just pick his feet up and swing down, and he just dips his left shoulder and takes him to the ground, and almost like what a lot of people might call a that's not a hawk roll, but a rolling motion, right? Hawk rolls, you wrap at the thighs. You have your head behind, wrap at the thighs, and then you roll into the tackle and take the person with you. The hawk roll is a consequence of not being able to run through
the running back. So in other words, picture this for coaches out there. And I mean, it's just good to know like why sometimes I go to clinics and they go, give me drills, give me drills, give me drills, give me drills. Well, understand what you're doing and why you're doing it so you can kind of poke holes and question and improve your process. Imagine your buddy's just walking down the street carrying a football going, snail's pace, and you get a 10-yard start and you run over there and you hit him right in the thigh, right in the hip, and run your hips. You would absolutely bury that person if you guys are anywhere near within 30, 40 pounds of the same weight. But if that person is, let's say 20 pounds bigger, and now he's running with intention, feet in the ground, heavy legs, very powerful, going in, the north-south vector, and you come from east to west, you put your head behind that person, your momentum, your power, your strength, your force might not be able to stop his momentum for going from south to north, while you're going east to west. Basically, it's like you're trying to catch the caboose of a train as it's going by and stop it. You're not going to be able to stop it. If you catch that caboose, your legs are going to swing out in the air. You're going to hang on for dear life. And now all of your weight's going to be added to that train. It's just a question of if your weight's enough to stop it. The hawk roll was designed because of that, because we understood, or rugby players understood, if you put your head behind their hips, you are not necessarily going to be able to just stop them in their tracks because you're running hard and they're running hard. And if your head's behind, your momentum's behind. If your momentum's behind, it's going to be really hard to run through that tackle. So what the better thing to do is wrap at the thigh, try to stop their legs from being able to move. And now use your arms and roll into your shoulder, because now you're using not only that east to west vector, but you're also using rotational force to wrap that person and roll them rotationally onto the ground. So you're using kind of two types of, you're introducing a new force once you make contact with that rotational force that makes it much more difficult to make that tackle. So that's why we do this. If you go head in front, you could probably have a better chance of running through that tackle, or you would, because your center of gravity is lined up with the running back. And two, you would roll the other way and they might roll up on top of you, which is what obviously no helmet rugby players are trying to avoid. So the point of this is we have kind of created some issues that maybe they didn't think about back when, like Pete Carroll and the Seahawks came out with this great video that changed the world of the NFL, at least, when they started talking about how to rugby tackle, the hawk roll, all these things. What's happened is because we don't train, especially these DBs, we don't spend enough time in technique. They see the hawk tackle, they go head behind, they go shoulder contact, they jump and grab. Instead of grabbing for the thigh, they grab for the hips, they stop moving their feet. And now what some of them have realized is, if I just run through this, let my feet go and swing through this guy like I'm literally on a swing at the playground, the momentum that is being created, the force, centrifugal force that's being created, is going to bring that person down. They're not thinking about hurting them necessarily. They just know it's a much more effective way for a 200-pound defensive back, 150-pound, 180-pound defensive back to get down a 250-pound running back. So we see from the Arizona Cardinals here, the Atlanta Falcons on defense, a perfect tackle. Textbook. Sprinted in. We talk about squaring up. He's ready to make a 90-degree shoulder contact. He's decelerated with his feet under control. He accelerates through the tackle, grabs the thigh, takes the man down. That is a perfect tackle. I'll show it one more time. I don't think there's anybody, and everybody's got a different way to talk about this, but if you just want to break it down to the simple component parts, you have square, dip, hammer, explode. He squares up, dips down, hammers his shoulder, explodes his hips, takes the running back to the ground. It's a phenomenal, phenomenal job. And that's what we're looking for time and time again. We just have to be able to do maybe a better job of spending more time on the technical part of this game. We'll look at one more here. And you can show DBs, you can show linebackers, you can show defensive ends or defensive tackles. This is another job where, because the defensive back doesn't run his feet, but he keeps them behind the runner, all the force is going, through those hips into the ground. He doesn't swing through. And so this is an effective play, probably because this wide receiver is a smaller guy and is just going to go down easier, because no reason to fight through this tackle. That's really not what his job description is, at least in context of some of the receivers that have gone through his position in the last couple of decades. So because he doesn't swing his feet through, you don't get that centrifugal force. You don't get that extra load. And it's enough with this player to just wrap at the hip, stop your feet, take a dive, go chest or shoulder to his side. We call that like a level 2 side tackle. And after a couple yards, falls down. See the defensive end here comes inside and plays like this because you have a larger player. You can just wrap and roll the quarterback down. Okay. And we see this all the time. There's so many things you'd like about the defensive tackle. Can he get a little bit lower so he doesn't get run through? But the fact that he just wraps, rolls, and actually at this point now, because you're protecting the quarterback, rolls him on top, you're in such a much better situation because we're talking about all this stuff. And what we really need to understand is obviously a lot of this has to do with who you're tackling, right? Because this is a 15-yard penalty. I reiterate, just for context, this was a 15-yard penalty. Interesting stuff about tackling. Again, the numbers don't lie. You go back and look at the tape. 30% of the time, we're not making shoulder contact. We're too high into contact. And if you take that back, why is that happening? Why are we not good? Well, because pre-contact, we do a poor job of decelerating under control. We're not square. We don't do a good job of changing levels by loading our hips. And it all has to do with our footwork and body position, just like on the blocking side. You just have to know what to look for. So if you're coaching, if you're working as a player, a mentor, anything you're trying to do in this game, understand why